I think we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's session titled Protect and Serve, Ensuring Equal Justice for LGBTQ People and Immigrant Women in the United States. I am Danielle Dean. I'm the Advocacy Vice Chair for the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area Chapter. Our chapter represents the DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia area. And today's session is in collaboration with our sister chapter in Boulder County, Colorado. And I will be co-hosting this session with the advocacy lead, Lisa McAllister. The United Nations Association is a movement of Americans dedicated to supporting the UN. We are dedicated to educating, inspiring, and mobilizing Americans to support the principles and vital work of the UN and its agencies. We are also joined today by our excellent panelists who have a wide range of expertise that address local perspectives on the impact of criminal justice system for immigrant women and the global perspective on criminal justice challenges faced by LGBTQ communities. This session hopefully will give audience members the opportunity to hear about current challenges faced by these two communities and connect with us afterwards to continue advocating for stronger protections. It is now my honor to introduce two of our panelists here today. Darius Edgerton, who has nearly 15 years of experience in American diplomacy and national security, including senior roles at the White House and the U.S. Department of State. He has helped shape U.S. foreign policy at the highest levels, including previous roles serving as senior advisor to the State Department's first special representative for racial equity and justice, director for diplomacy affairs to the president, and he supported the UN Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. As a freelance consultant, he now advises movements, philanthropies, and civil society organizations across the globe on how to engage in Washington, influence policy, and build cross-border coalitions that advance human rights and democratic resilience. It is also my honor to introduce Anna Khatter-Patel, who offers 25 years of experience in international peace building, development, and human rights, and she currently serves as the Washington, D.C. liaison for the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Thank you both for joining us. Now I would love to introduce my co-host, Lisa, who will introduce our remaining panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. It's so great to be here and welcome to everyone. It is my honor to introduce our two panelists working really on the ground on a local level. The first panelist here in Denver, Colorado is McKenna Newsom-Schoenberg. She is from the Justice and Mercy Legal Aid Center. McKenna is an immigration attorney at Justice and Mercy Legal Aid Center in Denver. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science and sociology from Emory University and her law degree from University of Denver, Sturm College of Law. The Justice and Mercy Legal Aid Center is dedicated to helping individuals and families navigate the complexities of U.S. immigration law. McKenna's practice focuses on providing strategic, compassionate representation in a wide range of immigration matters, including family-based petitions and humanitarian protections. McKenna approaches immigration law not simply as a legal discipline, but as a meaningful avenue to expand opportunity, protect families, and strengthen communities. Thanks for being here, McKenna. I'm also honored to introduce Emily Kleeman from the Reentry Initiative, located in Longmont, Colorado, but serving all of Boulder County here in Colorado. Emily is a seasoned clinical social worker and the executive director of the Reentry Initiative. Her career has been shaped by a deep commitment to understanding trauma and its lifelong impact on individuals, families, and communities. Throughout her work with women facing systemic marginalization, incarceration, and limited access to resources, Emily has become a dedicated advocate for social justice and trauma-responsive care. She is passionate about helping individuals uncover the why behind their experiences and build the skills needed to heal, grow, and reclaim their lives. Emily holds a BS in Human Development and Family Studies from the Colorado State University and a Master of Social Work from the University of Maryland, Baltimore, with dual specializations in clinical social work and management and community organizations. So, welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you here. I want to start the conversation by just doing some scene setting and starting out on the local level with Emily and McKenna. Emily, why don't you go first and tell us a little bit? Can you speak to what are some of the major challenges in the communities that you serve in Colorado?
Thank you, and thank you for having me here. So some of the major challenges that we see across Colorado, specifically with women from the immigrant and LGBTQ population, are really navigating systems that were never intended to work for them, and never really built with them in mind. So most are coming out of incarceration into a homeless situation, without childcare, without transportation, without access to gender responsive, culturally competent or culturally validated services. And these aren't the reason people are going into incarceration is not because of personal failings, but it's structural barriers that are making stability nearly impossible. So the people that we see, that we meet, carry a significant amount of trauma, mostly related to domestic violence, sexual violence, family rejection, or migration trauma. And the system responds currently with a surveillance and punishment instead of healing. So when legal help costs what it does, and they have very limited bilingual counsel services, and then on top of that, it's a pay-for-play system, that's where we find this population really having the most challenges in reentering into their communities. But when we are talking about reentry, we're talking about survival. And the women are juggling parole and probation requirements, parenting, employment, a fear of interacting with government agencies, especially if they're undocumented. It becomes more of a double jeopardy situation for them once they reenter. So that's mainly the main challenges we're seeing localized here.
Thank you. McKenna, what about you? What are the major challenges that you're seeing with the folks that you serve?
Yeah, like Emily said, thank you so much for having all of us here, for putting this on. And honestly, what Emily just said speaks volumes to what we're seeing also in the immigration context. I think seeing fear is huge, whether or not somebody has a documented status in this country or not. Fear of going out, even as a permanent resident, even as a naturalized citizen, even as somebody with a work permit, is felt deeply, to our communities, and with good reason, with what we're seeing going on today. Surveillance and punishment is really, Emily, thank you for that. I feel like I will take that and be using it all the time now, because that really is what both our criminal system and our immigration system has really latched onto. People are being incarcerated at rates that we haven't seen before, and then also held without the ability to get bond. And this is in an immigration context, not a criminal context, though I'm sure the two are very, very similar. So even qualifying for a bond is increasingly difficult. It was already difficult to begin with, but now various different policies have been put into place, have been implemented that make it nearly impossible, in all honesty. We're also seeing a lack of education about the immigration process and access to it. In that trying to navigate a very, very complex system that was, as somebody with a law degree who's been practicing for a while, each day brings new challenges, and something that I really have to focus on. How do we navigate these complex issues, let alone somebody who is new to this country, or maybe not new to this country, but doesn't know anything about the immigration process, what forms need to be filed, the filing fees themselves, what that looks like. And then also we have people who have come from, more specifically, if we are talking about like conservative countries where maybe one family member, traditionally speaking, it would be a husband or a father figure in that family, is the one that takes charge in the family. So filing for forms, filing for various different forms of relief, that sort of thing. So one person kind of holds the knowledge of what's going on in a case, and then the rest of the family is doesn't really know what's happening, doesn't have the knowledge that they need to adequately prepare themselves should they have some sort of interaction with police or ICE agents on their own. Additionally, we're also seeing domestic violence. So if something like that does occur in a home, that has huge implications on somebody's immigration status and the availability of benefits to them. Um, I think that that's pretty much it for us. Thank you.
Thank you,
No, great
McKenna.
points. Thank you.
So I love that we're doing, the global and the local, and luckily we have Anna here who can give a little bit more of the global perspective on what we're seeing on some of these challenges in the LGBTQ community. And then I want to definitely bring Darius into this conversation to start talking about, building the civil society aspect in and how that group of stakeholders is building larger awareness to just the community. So, Anna, first with you, could you give us a little bit more background on LGBTQ concerns globally?
Sure. First, I want to thank so much the organizers for inviting me to be a part of this. The UN Association and all of its chapters are really important advocates for the United Nations at all levels and important educators about the work the UN does, particularly in this moment when there seems to be a lot of education needed about the role the UN can play and the impact it has around the world. So thanks so much to Lisa and Danielle. And then I also want to call out to McKenna and I'm sorry, I can't see everybody's name, and Emily over there. So civil society is really at the forefront of every positive advance that we see in human rights at national and regional levels and at the United Nations. It just doesn't happen without civil society. I'm a strong believer that it takes civil society to decide what kind of rights they want to be recognized, and leaders then follow usually those the focus and work and the advocacy and oftentimes very dangerous work that civil society and human rights defenders and human rights activists around the world do at the local, at the state, and at the regional and global levels. I was asked to talk specifically about some of the major challenges for LGBTQ communities within justice systems. So I'm going to keep my remarks to that area and let some of the good experts on this panel talk to other points. But I was going to focus on three different points. The first is criminalization. The second is discriminatory laws. And the third is impunity and obstacles to justice. There are 193 member states in the United Nations. It used to be 192, but we have South Sudan now who's joined, so we have 193. About a third of these still criminalize private consensual relations between people of the same sex. That's around, I think, 65, if I do my numbers right. These laws subject millions to the risk of arbitrary detention, arrest, and prosecution, and even in some countries, the death penalty. Several countries also criminalize transgender and gender nonconforming people through laws that sanction so-called cross-dressing or imitating members of the opposite sex. A number of countries also have discriminatory laws that restrict or prohibit freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly based on sexual orientation and gender identity, including laws banning discussions or access of information about same-sex relations. In some cases, even pride marches are caught up in these kinds of bans. Impunity and obstacles of justice. The UN has documented widespread impunity for violence and human rights violations against LGBTQ persons, including as a result of failures to register and investigate cases, police action that is ineffective and guided by stereotypes and prejudices, misclassification of facts, threats to victims, lack of trust in law enforcement, and lack of state government monitoring and recording of official data on violence and hate crimes against LGBT people. So these are the three big challenges that I would say are present today in our current justice systems globally.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. And you can hear a lot of similar themes with what Emily and McKenna had also mentioned. Darius, so I want to talk specifically about grassroots groups that you have worked with or that you're monitoring that focus on these issues both from the immigrant, civil rights, and LGBTQ issues. What are the major challenges that you see these groups facing when they're trying to influence policy and public opinion? Do you find that a lot of these challenges are around, raising just general awareness to, average people who may not be as close to or paying attention to these issues? Is it gathering support or maintaining momentum? Would love to get your thoughts here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Danielle. And thanks for having me. Thanks, Lisa. Um, really good questions. And I couldn't, I am, firm believer in what Anna said about civil society and how nothing good really comes until civil society does it. I spent a lot of time at State Department connecting US-based civil society groups, advocating for all types of rights with their counterparts in other parts of the world. And so I spent a lot of time connecting LGBT rights groups here in the States with those around in South America and Asia. I spent a lot of time connecting civil society groups who are focused on the rights of marginalized racial and ethnic groups to other civil society groups. And so we kind of took a intersectional approach and made sure that because at the State Department we had we had a special envoy or a special representative for almost every like subset of marginalized folks, right? So we had a special representative for LGBTQ issues. We had a special representative for racial equity and justice. We had a special representative for disability rights and women and girls and so we had kind of all of the components working together to make sure that our strategies were aligned and married and making sure that we were kind of all, singing from the same sheet of music. One of a lot of the issues that these organizations were facing 2 years ago when I was still in the government are the same issues, but just compounded now, right? And so the good guys are always going to have resources issues, right? So they're under-resourced, they're overstretched. It seems like the guys who want to restrict rights are always have deep pockets, and the people who want to expand and protect and advance rights are always doing more with less. And so resources will always top my list. Um, I think there's also a real issue with burnout. I think that this work is really, really hard, and it feels like a David and Goliath kind of situation, and it feels like we don't even have a slingshot sometimes. And so this work, this work is you have to kind of always be encouraging yourself, and sometimes it gets really hard because the deck can really be stacked against you. So burnout and fatigue, I think, is a real big issue for civil society groups everywhere. I think they also spend a lot of time where they would be advocating for an issue. They spend a lot of time defending themselves from attacks from state actors and other malicious actors. They spend a lot of time wrapped up in legal affairs, and they don't have a lot of money to stay in litigation for a long time. So they spend a lot of time and resources reacting to attacks. They also have to figure out a way to do their work and circumvent criminalization and surveillance of their work and things like that. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I mean, it's just there's so many there's so many reasons to be discouraged, but there are also a lot of reasons to remain encouraged as well. And that's kind of what the folks that I work with in this space try to focus on, because if we look too much at the bad, then we'll all just kind of throw up our hands and say we're done. So yeah, resources and time and attention, I think are a lot of the big ones.
Thank you so much, Darius. I love that you are pointing this out too about burnout, because this is why we do panels like this, right? Is to educate the community. And because, we need people to be involved and educated to, you know, join forces to alleviate
Yeah,
some of that stress and burnout.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to move on to what has worked, what we see working in the current climate or recent past. Emily, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk about legislation that has supported the justice involved and the LGBTQ community that you have worked with?
Absolutely. That's a great question. Luckily, I live in a very wonderfully progressive state that is very supportive and has meaningful legislation to really protect the LGBTQ and immigrant population. We have LGBTQ inclusive anti-discrimination. We have this one decree that just happened in 2024 in Colorado that the Department of Corrections must provide trans women housing options that fit their identity, which I personally have seen, having gone into Denver Women's Correctional Facility recently. I have seen that transition in the last 2 years, and it is a beautifully, wonderfully safe decree that is protecting our women. We also have some really great protections around housing, employment, and stability post-release. That's really come to help us get people placed into housing without discrimination. And the gender affirming care, that is something I'm watching right now because we know what's going on federally. And I know there's been cuts to our state hospitals as far as providing gender affirming care. So I'm a little concerned there. But we were one of the first states that really pushed those efforts forward. And we have a large community of people that access those services. So I'm hopeful that things will pan out the way they should. And that's why we're here to fight, is to keep fighting for these progressive measures that we have in Colorado. And I do believe Colorado does a very good job kind of setting the stage for other states to follow behind us.
Awesome. Thank you. McKenna, this leads right into this question about federal funding. So, in light of federal funding disappearing, can you speak to how local agencies have stepped in to address the need to treat these communities equally, to treat the immigrant community specifically equally?
Absolutely. Thank you for this question. Again, along with what Emily was saying, especially with gender affirming care, in September of last year, ICE actually ended a policy that provided protection for people who identify as trans and affirming healthcare while in private immigration facilities. And then we're also talking about currently, Colorado is dealing with, the last number that I read was an $850 million shortfall in terms of federal funding. So obviously implications everywhere. But when we're speaking about what that means immigration wise, my instinct is to think about the providers and how we already have a lack of providers. And so then that lack of federal funding goes to kind of deepen that wound, right? And so we have seen Remain, the Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network, was one of the only organizations in Colorado that had attorneys that would be in our immigration courts. And they would not even, they do provide legal representation, but in this capacity, they weren't providing legal representation. They were merely stating somebody's rights, right? You have the right to an attorney. One will not be appointed for you, but here's a list of pro bono attorneys or private attorneys who you can contact. Various different things, right? Going through the list of their rights. And one of the things that was cut first was that program when they did lose some of their federal funding. And so it has had a significant impact. But one thing about people is we are resilient. I think to Darius's point, burnout is real, but also people do the worst of circumstances. Sometimes the best of community is built, and we find ourselves challenged to be creative and to think about what else, how can we push this envelope or do something different that hasn't been done, or maybe do something that's been done in the past and recreate that to fit this moment. And so we have seen organizations pop up. We've seen miraculous donations or grants from the state, from donations from private entities or private funders. We've also seen, to Emily's point, I am very thankful to be in Colorado. We've seen our state legislators really step up to the plate. Nobody's perfect, but there are many different House bills currently on the floor. One of them, I don't have the numbers, but one of them is holding federal immigration agents accountable for how they work and how they operate, and creating a pathway for people to sue them should their rights be infringed or violated. There's another House bill that aims to regulate how private information is shared with ICE, and trying to make it so that if there's not a criminal investigation, state, local law enforcement will not share that information again unless there's some sort of criminal investigation going on. Those are two of many different bills that are currently on our floor. And so I'm thankful for our state, our politicians, local advocacy groups that are pushing politicians to push these pieces of legislation forward. And then again, grassroots organizations that have really stepped up to protect people's rights, particularly those who are incarcerated, particularly those that are members of marginalized groups, like folks who are part of the LGBTQ communities, and women and immigrants. So
yeah, that's a great segue because, as we look at, the local rights and what we're doing to kind of build better infrastructure to ensure that our rights are protected here, we do have this overall umbrella of global rights that we're a part of and should be, uh, implementing. So I really want Anna to talk a little bit about, what are some of the international norms or treaties that are the backbone for country level rights and protections. And have you seen that, any best practices from NGOs or other countries that have done a really good job at implementing some of those?
Great. I'm going to try not to be the bad news person always on the panel, but in the opening words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. The rights to equality and non-discrimination are core principles of human rights enshrined in what we call the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as in a variety of international and human rights treaties. We're here speaking as part of a panel on the Commission of Status of Women. Of course, CEDAW, which is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, is also another one of these international treaties that provides the international human rights law framework for these rights. LGBTQ persons have the same rights as everyone else, including life, freedom from torture and ill treatment, liberty and security, health, education, employment, adequate housing, freedom of expression, association, peaceful assembly, and equality before the law. On the regional level, here in this hemisphere, we have the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. In Europe, the European Convention on Human Rights. And in Africa, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, just among a few. So there are layers of both global and international human rights treaties that provide these rights to all of us. There are no exemption clauses in any of these international human rights treaties that allow a state to guarantee human rights for only some people and withhold them from others on the basis of anything: identity, sexual orientation, or gender expression of sex characteristics. So that said, we have heard from McKenna and others some of the challenges that are there in individual cases, of course, and what we're seeing as patterns. In 2025, for the first time, the number of countries that criminalize consensual same-sex relations actually increased rather than decreased, where we were seeing some really strong advancement in the years before that. A lot of that is because we are seeing political candidates and parties globally use anti-LGBTQ political rhetoric in speeches and in political campaigns. And there are decreased reports of harassment and attacks and violence globally across the world. However, we did see some points of good news in 2025. The decriminalization of consensual same-sex relations in St. Lucia entered into force. There's marriage equality laws in Thailand, positive court judgments on the rights of transgender people in Kenya, new protective legislation in Cuba, and the Human Rights Council renewed its mandate of the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender. These are very important, and we have to take these successes, even though we know it's in the face of great challenges. As I think Darius said, and others, we have to hold on to those moments where there is some success and focus on them, even when it feels like we're sliding backwards on many different levels. Overall, 78 countries prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation, 45 based on gender identity, and 18 based on sex characteristics. And many have taken steps to recognize same-sex couples and families, including through marriage equality laws, and others to prohibit harmful practices such as conversion therapy and medically unnecessary interventions on intersex children. We've been lauding civil society, and Emily and McKenna are our examples here, as well as the UN Association, which is very much a part of the civil society. Civil society organizations give visibility and voice. They document human rights abuses and provide criminal evidence that drive change. They increase awareness to the general public, and they fight for accountability. And so the work that is being done, even in your community on small levels, and you think, oh, well, it's in just this small place, it resonates, it reverberates, it has an echo globally. It is important. It adds to the positive cases that we have and the positive forward motion. Business also has a role to play. We are seeing some risk aversion right now, but business has played, and there are a few who have continued to play a very strong role and should be pressed. We see that consumer support and consumer protests around the world has an effect, and we see that some companies will take a stand. Others perhaps will keep their heads down, but they can. Consumers have power, and businesses can play a huge role in their own structures, ensuring respect for fundamental human rights, including respect for LGBTQ persons, and they can stand up for human rights in public discussions and debates. It's very clear in many governments the role and maybe increasing role that business leaders play in politics, and so they are an important part of moving progress forward and of respecting human rights for all globally. I'll leave it there.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's a perfect segue to you, Darius. We're talking more about civil society groups and what you've seen work, and how do you motivate people, right? From maybe the monitoring and, I'm paying attention, I care about this issue, I want to do more. How do you activate? How have you seen people activate?
Yeah. It's
Well,
that's the hardest part, right? To go from words to action. But I've seen a few strategies work, and I've mentioned a few, and so I'll kind of just start where she left off. One of the things I talk about a lot is information politics, and part of that is like that's data collection and stuff like that, but also storytelling and narrative, right? And so I think sometimes we lose sight over how powerful a good story can be, and how a good, clear story can help people understand how your struggle is connected to theirs, and how they need to be fighting with you. Um, so I'm really big on storytelling, narrative generation or narrative change, things like that. Symbolic politics as well is the second thing that I'll mention. The arts are huge, like big important for all kinds of movements. And so the plays, the movies, the songs, all of the art that is a little political can go a long way. And so we try to encourage organizations to lean into the cultural side of things because that's actually a lever of power that you can pull. Um, Connecting issues that people already care about. And so I mentioned earlier the importance of intersectionality. I think that connecting movements so that they relate to one another, but also snowball and like grow is a really good way to get your message out, but also to galvanize the people that you need to galvanize to actually make the change. Um, I think that like for instance, I always say that you can't have racial justice until you have without economic justice. And so the labor movement and the anti-racist movement should be working together in lockstep because their issues and their interests overlap. And what they want to see happen overlaps. And so just connecting to other movements that on its face have nothing to do with your movement, but also like once you get down into the weeds, you actually understand how all of these dots are connected. Um, I gotta say, digital tools, social media. I mean, that's one of the easiest and cheapest ways to like get a message out there. I mean, it takes a lot to build a following on any of these platforms, but if and when you do, then that's a really good way to mobilize people really quickly. Um, what else? Oh, leverage politics. I am a huge fan of shaming bad actors publicly. I think that I mean, coming from diplomacy, we do it all the time. And so, like, that's a tool that I learned. It's just, speaking out, speaking truth to power in a way that almost embarrasses, the power structures and kind of like compels them to do better. Um, and then just, I think I don't know how to say it, but we kind of already mentioned it, just like trying to stay in good spirits and also like encourage your colleagues that are fighting with you because um, we're all not super optimistic at the same time, right? And so sometimes I could be I could be waning and maybe you heard a good story on the way into work and like you are full of hope and positivity, like share that with me, you know what I mean? So that we can continue the fight. Um, those are a few things I think that really help movements grow and and be effective, I think.
Thank
That's
you,
great.
Darius. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted a shameless plug for you, Lisa, because
Oh,
one of the things that we do at our chapter, but Lisa just recently has done, is hold advocacy trainings where we talk about bringing your individual voice and how to build a story or a narrative around the things that you care about and why it's relevant and why your members of Congress and others should pay attention to that. So I just love that you mentioned the storytelling and those on this call that are interested in kind of building that muscle. Shameless plug for UNA chapters, either the Boulder or DC uh, chapters that get involved. Sorry, Lisa.
no, that's great. That was exactly what I was thinking when Darius was talking about storytelling, how important it is to own our narratives. And so we're hosting a narrative workshop on the 25th of March. So here at the Boulder Public Library. And I love what you said too about connecting the dots between causes. Like we really have to see where we're impacting one another in our work and where we can really grow impact through collaboration. It's so important not to work in a silo. See that over and over again. So thanks so much. I want to turn the conversation back a little bit to the women that are being impacted most in this, just the global situation, but locally. Emily, I know you have a big focus on trauma-informed care, And so many women enter the system because of survival-driven circumstances. How do you support these women and their families?
Thank you for asking that. So I look at trauma now at a five-prong approach. What we do here at TRI, the Reentry Initiative, is we learn that people that are struggling in reentry, we have to start with dignity, safety, and their choice. So that's where we start all of our services. When we meet with our members, I don't call them clients because they're not someone to be managed or care for. These are humans and they're members of our society and our community. So our members are treated as partners in their healing, and we are just the vessel that gets them there. And the way that we do that is through integrated wraparound support. And, humans don't experience challenges in silos, so we shouldn't be looking at their challenges in siloed organizations. And like Darius said, and others on this call, that's where collaboration needs to happen, because what I may not be able to address, some other organization could address it, and we could work together better. But in the nonprofit world, we were raised in silos and we're all competing for the same funding. So I'm really trying to push for diversified funding sharing within organizations so that funding never gets lost or not spent. So I'm pushing for those initiatives. But the other things that I'm seeing is we need to remove practical barriers at the beginning. So we do things like transportation, childcare, Medicaid navigation. We make sure when people walk out of prison, if they don't have their Medicaid or state IDs for whatever reason, we address those things without any barriers to them by cost or anything. We also know that if we don't remove those barriers, that's what's going to become compliance versus a technical violation, which then would send them back into our systems. So again, it's practical first needs are met. And then we've added in the last 3 years our peer experience. I have a wonderful peer mentor on my team who was a graduate of my program. And that has changed the game for us because when members walk in, they see themselves. And then they also see someone that has gone through the system successfully, not without challenges, but they can share that and then try to change the narrative of the next person. And that's where the narrative comes in and storytelling, because our justice system is black and white legal language that none of us really could understand if you don't have a law degree. So it's important we explain that what's on the crime charge or what they were convicted with that isn't as bad or egregious as actually the story they were living. So that humanizes things. And then, of course, there's the culturally responsive identity affirming. I was taught culturally competent. I don't like that idea because nobody can be competent in everything, but you can validate cultural experiences. You can meet people and learn from them. And if you're not an expert, you can explore learning opportunities to learn more, but you're never going to fully understand it because we're all so different. So I really push the idea of culturally responsive, meaning if we can't meet the need or you don't see yourself in the service or the treatment that we're providing for you, we're going to find an agency that's an expert in that.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Thank you. McKenna, Emily mentioned dignity, and that's such an important aspect to not continuing to re-traumatize people. And so for women being held while waiting for immigration proceedings, what are some of the solutions to uh, detention with dignity?
Yeah, so much of this all of it comes to validation and recognition of a person as a person, right? I've seen a number of attorneys when you are in immigration court similar to a criminal court, names aren't used. Instead, there's a case number that's used or in a registration number. And asking people to acknowledge that we're talking about a human being who has a real life with a real family, with real complications, real issues, just like any of the rest of us. But asking that a name be used, something I want to say, the phrase is something so small. Really, that's a huge step, right? In recognizing somebody's humanity, somebody's dignity. But it is also something that as an attorney, if like I'm just going through a court case, it is actually something very small that I can ask for. right? I can simply say, can we please use this person's name? Whoever it is, however they identify, and move forward from there. So just things like that, right? Respecting somebody's humanity and dignity. I think one of the things is like voting. Congress has a huge amount of power in terms of how people, particularly those who are incarcerated in immigration detention, are treated. And so really making sure that we are other people, you want to run for office because you have ideas, by all means, like feel empowered to do so, or at the very least, read about the people who we are electing and hold their feet to the fire. If they promise something, right, make sure that we're holding people accountable for those things. There's other programs too. I know in Colorado, Casa de Paz has a visitation program where people can go. There's background checks and vetting that has to go through it, but to see another human being's face come and visit you and talk to you while you're in detention, obviously can be world changing, right? To have a part of your week or your month where you can talk to somebody, and if you choose to tell your story, share your story or a piece of your story with that person, so that then maybe that can also be shared in a dignified way, so that we can create some sort of dignified storytelling, but also creating a record of exactly what is going on, and then being able to use that record as the way to push the needle, right? I know that there's ongoing litigation that's in front of the Supreme Court right now, but in 2014, and this is close to home because it happened in the Aurora detention facility, but that immigrants were being paid, given $1 per day to do work in the immigration. Yeah, I mean, I can't really call it pay. It can't be called a gift. They were handed $1 per day to do manual labor within the detention facility. And if they refused to do that detention facility, they were faced with potential solitary confinement. It is vile. And so people who were detained and forced to do these things have filed a class action. And the Geo Group, they said that they were immune because they were a government contractor. And the Supreme Court in February actually denied their motion to dismiss based off of that immunity. So again, cause for some hope here. At least the case wasn't just thrown out based off of immunity, and the case can proceed forward. But I think really holding people's feet to the fire. Darius said, if you are one of those people who wants to call attention to bad acting, call attention to people who are denying other people's fundamental rights just to express themselves, to be, right? Do so. And then also, if you are in the Denver area, I don't know about other places, but, and you want to visit somebody or be part of a pen pal program, at least again, to provide some sort of emotional support, but then also potentially, if the person chooses, I think that's huge. There should be consent here. But if that person consents to sharing a piece of their story or all of their story, and then, sharing that story in a dignified way so that we do have that written record, so that we can use that to hold other people accountable for what's going on in our detention facilities.
That's great. I know that we're running out of time. The hour goes by quickly. So I want to finalize like our last little set here about what else we can do. What is our current position with at the federal level, and especially looking at the UN. The US has made some significant deviations from previous administrations as it relates to our commitments with the UN. McKenna and Emily, to your point about, sorry, there's a feather somewhere around here, but to our commitments about funding for the UN, making sure that we're giving the appropriate resources to the agencies that do a lot of this similar work at the international level, as well as our commitment to certain policies. All of that has kind of changed. So I'm hoping Anna can quickly just touch on, what she's kind of seen as like recent developments here. And then Darius, if you wouldn't mind coming in and talking about, given some of this landscape changes, how have civil society groups kind of looked at this, and how are they reacting, and what we can expect moving forward. So Anna, off to you.
Yes. So I'm sure that most of the people watching this are involved in CSW will know that there is, of course, an increasing influence of anti-rights actors, including in the UN Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, and in other governing bodies. The U.S. has withdrawn from the Human Rights Council. Now, withdrawing from the Human Rights Council does not mean that it isn't still considered under the Universal Periodic Review, which is a way in which, if we're thinking about sort of things that people can do, that civil society contributes to the UN's assessment of a country's human rights record. And so even though the US withdrew from the council, it was still assessed last year as part of it. And civil society organizations came together across the United States and contributed to their report, submitting their own on the ground, very local information and cases to that, and in being involved in national consultations, et cetera. These are important efforts, and they are seen. The other, in terms of what we're talking about today, in terms of the impact on women and girls and LGBTQ, the U.S. has also withdrawn from UN Women, which is the UN entity for gender equality and empowerment, and the UN Population Fund, which focuses on reproductive health, maternal health, and family planning. This is obviously regretted, and we very much hope that the U.S. will rejoin in all of those organizations at some point. And there is an impact across the UN and UN agencies of the decrease in funding that the U.S. through either USAID or the State Department or in has had across the board. Also, give an example of the Trust Fund for Victims of Torture, which was a bipartisan legislation passed, I think, in 2010, led by Tom Lantos and some current Congress people, and appropriated money that went not just around the world and internationally, but also to many U.S. organizations and NGOs that do work with victims of torture. I've had an opportunity to visit some of them. This is incredible work and very, very difficult work being done in this country and around the world. And so all of that funding was lost. Now we hope this year that maybe some of that funding will go back, at least to these trust funds, for example, that go directly to victims. But, we are also seeing things like in December, the General Assembly plenary approved an amendment to remove the words sexual orientation and gender identity from the list of grounds of discrimination in a resolution. This is the first time in history that this has happened. So, and because of a pressure of some states, a number of UN entities have deleted references to sexual orientation and gender identity on their websites and documents. States have pressured others to do the same in other governing bodies. So we are seeing this. It is a constant challenge and struggle. And while it can be somewhat tedious to watch a Security Council meeting or a General Assembly meeting and watch the diplomats parry with this language. That is what they are doing, is trying to keep the rights that in the language that was agreed on by all 193 member states, and not have a few that have a different definition have such a strong influence on what this global body does. So yes, but also use the UN Association to reach out to your representatives and talk about the issues that are important to your community and how they connect to international human rights law. All the work that Emily is talking about, that Lisa is talking about, that McKenna is talking about, has a background and a founding in international human rights law that covers migrants, that covers the rights of refugees, that covers LGBTQ persons. And so keep advocating to your representatives that these issues are important to you and that all people deserve these rights at all times.
Fantastic. Yeah, Darius, off to you.
Yeah, so I think your question to me was like how we should be operating at the different levels of government and at this time. I think it's weird, but if we're being honest, in this political moment, like the federal government is um not our friend. It's being used to roll back protections and not expand them. And so the question isn't really how we work with Washington, but more so how we out organize and outlast them. Us, them. Um, yeah, we're in a weird time because I'm used to figuring out ways to work with the federal government. That's not an option now, and so we are actually working against the federal government now, in a lot of ways. But one thing that civil society has been good at, and probably will always be good at because of the power imbalance, is strategizing and working with whomever is willing to work with you, right? And so, in the United States in particular, but also elsewhere around the world, civil society is really good at maintaining focus and contacts at all levels of government, right? And because you have to work with the people who are on your side when they are in power, right? And so when you have a federal government working against you, maybe there's a state government that is friendly toward you that you can work with to, you know, at least establish a floor for rights, for people's rights. And if there's not a state government, then maybe there's a local government, right? Um, Sometimes all three levels of government are hostile, and you need to take your talents to Geneva, to the UN, and tell a multilateral organization about what's going on in your community. For example, we were part of the what does SURD stand for? The there's a UN mechanism for racial discrimination, that like countries come to Geneva like every couple years and like explain, like the governments explain to the UN what they are doing to protect and advance the rights of marginalized people. And civil society from those countries are also in the room, and they get a chance to then tell the UN what their perspective. And so there are always ways to engage governments, but the game of it, or the whack-a-mole part, is figuring out which governments and which people in government to lean on, and which to kind of like pivot efforts from this way because this seat just changed, and so now we need to like look over here because we have a friend over here. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of being very strategic and very intentional about relationship building, and being able to call in a favor when that window of opportunity presents itself.
Great. Thank you, Darius. I also wanted, before I move on to McKenna and Emily, just encourage, if you have a question from our attendees, just please post it in the Q&A, and we'll have a couple minutes here at the end to answer those questions. So around, how do we revitalize support for local and direct services? I think that it's really easy for people to get outraged on a national level. We see what's happening in the news, and people get outraged and they post on social media and they call their senators and congressmen, but there's local action that can be taken right here in our own towns and cities. And so I'm wondering, how do we revitalize support for our local and direct services? Emily, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I really thought through this question because it's such a thoughtful question. And it starts with starting to share values with other missions. We don't have to have identical missions in order to work and serve people in need. So that's one way, like we were saying before, we can't be siloed. We should be sharing funding, especially now with funding cuts. I love the idea of I'm always watching the news. I hate the news, but I need the news because I need to know who's coming behind and watch the shift of our politicians, our state level politicians, when they decide they need to go to DC. how their values change. So I'm always keeping my pulse on that barometer. And like you said, Darius, partnering with people when I see opportunities, even people I never thought I would partner with. And then centering that lived experience. I think for years, nonprofits were afraid to talk about the trauma out loud. And I think now communities are willing to hear the stories, the real truth of what they're experiencing. So our peer-led, that's a coalition to share the story, that share the narrative, normalize what armed robbery looks like and why someone was led to commit a crime of armed robbery. We also want to remind people that your local nonprofits, they're the ones that are reducing recidivism. We're the ones that are putting the dollars in their gas tank, and we're the ones giving them the transportation or the childcare. So it's important to really invest in your local nonprofits. Your money will go much further in a donation to a small mom and pop grassroots versus a big conglomerate, which they can't really tell you exactly where your dollars are going. Um, and then, of course, building coalitions around basic needs. Enough with the bureaucracy. Everybody has a right to transportation, childcare, mental health access, and there shouldn't be all these bureaucratic loopholes we have to jump through. There shouldn't be, I don't know who's making the rates of who gets Medicaid and who doesn't, but I don't think they're talking to people about what $2,000 a month is and how does that even go too far to like even cover their rent. So really trying to explain to these bigger or these bigger federal programs that when you cut that Medicaid, I mean, you literally just restarted the crisis problem, and we will see increase in recidivism. We will see people returning to their old ways because they can't make ends meet. They can't even feed themselves. Um, and that's back to, again, where we need to lift up these communities. We need to find leaders in the community that have the lived experience that can share the narrative on the national and the global stages. And that's what I want to do. I just want to platform real stories now and try to share to the community that 90% of people that are behind the walls or in the immigration facilities are coming back out, hopefully. And we need to do something for sure about the for-profit industrial complex that we've created, like Geo and Core Civic. They need to go because we can do it better, and we need to be the ones in charge of where we go in the future.
Oh, so well said, Emily. Thank you. McKenna, what do you want to add to that?
Emily did a great job, really hitting a few different points here. And so I guess just highlighting, I think, like everybody has said, the power, I think, Darius, to quote you exactly, the power of a good story, right? And so that means hearing from people themselves, either, having a platform and so that person can tell their story, or if that's not something that they want, having it written down or sharing it in a different way that feels more comfortable for them. But sharing that story that then will be the leverage, I guess, that we need to show people that no, like we're not just talking. This isn't just like me thinking in theory, right? This is a real situation that needs real attention and needs real change. I was reading this study of people who are incarcerated, who are detained at, this is nationally, but in immigration detention, and 74% of them, this was as of February of 2026, 74% of people who are in immigration detention do not have a criminal record. That is not to say that just because you have a criminal record, you should be in immigration detention, but just in terms of also challenging narratives, challenging the lack of facts that we are hearing constantly. We're going after people who have serious criminal records, right? The people who we are arresting have murder charges, felonious assault, something like that, but that's actually not the case. And so also making sure, whether it's debating with your family members, whether it's your friends, your communities, going to the state capitol, going to congressional hearings, and making sure that people hear your voice. And again, if you have that platform and are able to tell somebody else's story in a dignified way, sharing those as well, right? I think is super important. Shameless plug here, as well as Emily, I do work for a nonprofit as well. And so people's time and their money makes a huge difference. And so if the way that you can support different nonprofits or different organizations is through volunteering or giving a donation, those speak volumes, and they get used. Every single cent gets used, gets put forth towards if a cause that there's one particular to you or just our overall, the mission that we are trying to accomplish. And then there was one last thing that I was going to say, and I've forgotten it. Oh, just in terms of if you have an idea about how the nonprofits, how different organizations can work together, having spaces like this is super, super helpful. Now I know Emily at the Reentry Initiative, and I know these other fabulous folks in DC, and like if there's something that we need from each other or something that we have an idea, now we have more people that we can loop into our idea and really push that ball forward. So I really do appreciate these spaces, and I hope that we all continue to have those. And again, whether that looks like a neighborhood community dinner or something more localized or international, where we're working together with each other. We are all a part of one community, and nobody's going to take care of ourselves. Like nobody's going to take care of us. We must take care of each other, and this is how we can do it.
Oh, I just love that theme. It gives me chills. I think one of the most impactful things that I ever participated in was there was a local theater organization that was working with immigrants to workshop their stories, and they would spend 6 weeks workshopping and writing their personal stories, and then stand on stage, and a member of the community would read their story with the person who wrote it standing next to them. And this is just, to me, so simple and yet no longer it seems to be ingrained in our society, right? To just see who's in front of you, see who's next to you, see someone, be curious about someone who's different than you is such a vital first step. I mean, I'll get off. Oh, yeah, it was the Modus Theater. Yes, someone in the chat told me who that was. It was so amazing. And so I'll get off my soapbox, but I think that's such a impactful way just to see our fellow community members. Um, any questions? I know we had a question in the chat about UNA, but before I move on, Danielle, did you have anything?
Didn't
Other-
I did connect her with our email addresses, so hopefully she reaches out to learn more about UNA. Glad that that there's some interest there.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any questions in the. I'll continue to monitor, Lisa, if you want to
Yeah.
continue.
No, I mean, I think this was such an impactful conversation. I just thank you all so much. And I think we'll be sending out just a follow-up email with some resources that or each of the panelists gave to us, as well as, information on each of your organizations. So if people want to get more deeply involved, yeah, getting involved with the UN Association, I think, is a great step as well. I know I got involved because I had an international interest in do a lot of international development work. But what I've really found is where I get the most, joy, satisfaction, feel like I'm making the most impact is what I've learned about engaging locally that goes beyond yeah, sending the form letter that you can shoot to your senators or congressmen, but really being more educated about what's happening in my community. So thank you all.
Yes, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to UNCSW. We are here today because of the international conveners, the people that we all have a shared interest in this topic. We all have the shared values, and we want to see what we're doing in our local communities expanded out to our countries, to our nations. We're all neighbors. We're all people of and so, I just really appreciate everyone's diverse perspective and the time that you've given us today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.